Hello and welcome. Tonight we're speaking about Waldorf Education. With me is Dorit Winter, the director of the Bay Area Center for Waldorf Teacher Training, and Jeff Loubet, a second grade teacher at the East Bay Waldorf School. Welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
So I'd love to just have a general introduction, perhaps of the history of Waldorf.
The whole educational paradigm is based on the work of Rudolf Steiner, and his studies were mainly in the sciences. He studied math, physics, chemistry, and biology at university, but he was very interested in the humanities as well, and earned his PhD in philosophy, in mostly epistemological studies. So from the start, he was extremely interested in the consciousness of consciousness. And Waldorf education is the one aspect of his work that has become a little bit better known than, for example, the work he did in medicine or in biodynamic agriculture and various other fields like that. So that today we have about 1,030 Waldorf schools and about 2,000 kindergartens spread around the world in 60 countries, including all the continents, and now there's quite a burgeoning in the Far East. So the education has been around for almost 100 years, but because it is such a different paradigm that it's based on, we still sometimes feel as if we're swimming upstream quite a bit.
Yes, I'm surprised at the number of people who really aren't familiar with Waldorf. There were a number of great documentaries about education in 2010 that really were pointing out a lot of the problems with education, but I didn't notice Waldorf mentioned in any of them. And one of them, Race to Nowhere, was very focused on how much abstraction and homework we're heaping on our children and not allowing them to be kids, to protect their childhood. And it seems to me that that's just what Waldorf does. It's a very different model. We were speaking prior to the beginning tonight, and I mentioned that my son Nelson was struggling, and when he acts up, they just punish him or send him to the office, and there's no plan B. And you had smiled and said, well, we have no plan A. And I just think that's wonderful. Jeff, you're a second grade teacher. I think that one of the really interesting things about Waldorf is this practice of the teacher following the kids all the way through. You start with them, and you stay with them all the way through. That's quite a commitment.
Yes. The strength in that is that you really penetrate into the heart and soul of those children. You take them to heart every single day as you teach them. So it's not just a job. It's really a way of finding yourself working with that child over time, teaching them in each of their centers. So have I touched their mind today? Have I touched their feelings? Have I engaged them, their will, their body? Have I gotten them to do something? And over time, I feel that if you meditate on the child and you are committed to opening their heart, then you can find any sort of solution that is necessary. That's my experience. If you're committed, and you stay with that child.
That's so different from a public school model. You hardly know where to begin. Not only that, but the way that your curriculum and the way that you hold back. You hold back from, say, division. The child doesn't learn division until he's, say, 9. Yes. Because before that, the I is still developing, and really he sees the world as one. So you don't want to divide the world yet.
And so ripeness is all, bringing the right the right thing at the right time.
Yes.
So Waldorf education is developmental, which means I have to look not only at the child and their individual needs, but also what a child at that particular age, what feeds them, what meets them. So I'm looking at both the person in front of me and their strengths and weaknesses and their gifts and where I might stretch them. And I'm also looking at the bigger picture that stands below me as a teacher, this developmental model that gives me all the insights that I need. So if I'm, for example, teaching a child in second grade, how can I illustrate moral behavior? I can use some of these stories of the saints, for example. And if I tell a story about St. Francis taking off all of his clothes and giving them to a beggar, that speaks legions to a child. Then if I just give them moral maxims, that doesn't stick to their souls.
Yes.
But stories do. There's real insight there. It goes into their heart and into their imagination. And from there, their concepts have a sort of a richness to them.
Do all the children learn the same story at the same time?
Well, as we go through the year, developmentally, each year has its themes. And all of our curriculum is rooted in those themes. So if they learn language arts in second grade, they learn it via the saint stories or fables. So in second grade, we learn about the two sides of humanity, the more noble self and the friskier self, if you will, the one who wants to perhaps be a little more risque, you know?
Yes.
So fables are about foibles. And the noble personalities, they're about something that we aspire to our higher selves. And so if I give them pictures from both worlds, they can laugh at themselves when they're more like animals, and they can see themselves as higher beings. And then we can tell stories about these and put them in our main lesson books. So there's a whole creative process that surrounds each of those moral ideas, moral stories.
I think this wonderfully illustrates the idea of Waldorf education being an education for life. It, along the way, enables children to do very well academically. But it isn't about academics per se. The academics, the math, the reading, the writing, which the children become very proficient at to the extent that each child is going to become proficient in those areas, because every child has his own strengths and weaknesses. To that extent, they will be able to carry those things into their life and build on the idea that the stories are there to really build a capacity, an inner capacity. We could say a spiritual capacity at the right time when the child is developmentally able to digest that and really make it part of her own makeup. That becomes a strength when you're no longer in school, when you're 35 and 45, and you're really facing what I like to call the storms and vicissitudes of life. Now, that this is not an education meant for the short haul. And Jeff can refer back to these stories as he gets to third and fifth and eighth grade and remind the children. And it's a wonderful thing to, as a class teacher, I was a class teacher for a short time, to refer back to what the children learned earlier and have them remember with great joy something that they learned in the third grade. And now they see it from a much different place. And I just want to add that our high schools, of which there are not enough, they are really filled with wonderful success stories, both academically, but again, engaging the adolescent, really filling their lives with meaningful activity. So I think from the preschool through the 12th grade, there is very little time that is treading water. It just looks different at every grade, you know? So in the early childhood, we encourage the children to play, but we also encourage them to clean the room and bake bread. And I think another element of Waldorf that can easily be misunderstood has to do with the notion that we work through the arts. Jeff mentioned imagination and creativity, but for us, these are not things that mean that anything goes. So in other words, imagination and creativity can be brought to bear upon the sciences as well. So it's more a question of attitude, deliberativeness, care, which are qualities that every scientist needs.
So there might be an assumption by parents and others that the majority of Waldorf graduates would gravitate toward the arts. And what you're saying is that that's not particularly true.
No.
And that the education will nourish the discriminating mind that might care to delve into the material world.
Yes.
Through the hard sciences.
Yes, where the paradigm really has to do with the fact that art and science have a lot to say to each other through the humanities as well, that these are not entirely separate worlds. And I think that's an idea that we're beginning to find in, let's call it, the mainstream world as well.
Well, I think people are tired of the, science seems like it's taking over. It seems like, if something could be called unscientific, it can be ignored or dismissed or scoffed at, which, is unfortunate. And everything has to be measured, so that all these things are lost, that the felt presence of immediate experience is undervalued, because of science. If you can't graph that out, then you can't make your point to, not just to a scientist, but to anyone. So any sort of education that really focuses on the spirit is really unique in this materialistic world. Rudolf Steiner, it seems that he was very prescient. We're getting, when I went to kindergarten, I didn't get the things pushed on me that my son did, and my son repeated kindergarten, which I had never heard of in my life. And so I think that anything that could act as a bulwark against this ever-pressing steamroller of material science is very valuable. And to speak about the spirit with no apologies is a very good thing.
Yeah, in the teacher training, where our students come to become Waldorf teachers, we really tried over the 3 years of the program to make it possible for them to understand the work of Rudolf Steiner, to begin to understand. And I think that one reason it's so difficult to penetrate is that when something is spoken out of the spirit about things that cannot be measured and weighed and counted, it requires the development of an inner strength, particularly the strength to think consequentially without thinking abstractly. And right there you have an idea that is not common.
Well, that's a very interesting distinction, isn't it?
But that's also what is happening in the classroom with the children.
Yes.
They are experiencing what they are learning. They are not learning by memorization.
Right.
Well, I think at some point you have to start to learn how you have to memorize certain things.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it's a whole body exercise.
Exactly.
In your case.
Exactly.
Right.
It's really three-centered work when you craft a lesson. So at the end of the lesson, you want there to be some cognizance of what they're talking about. But you journey through that by engaging them in physical activities and dramatic activities. Let's say we're doing language arts, and I'm telling about one of those saint stories. So we might enact the story. Then we might describe the adjectives in the story in a playful way. We start to craft the language. We brainstorm. And out of the experience of the story, out of the richness of the imagination, then they're able to refine their language and not only speak what's inside, what do they feel, how do they identify with those characters, but also what do they see. So there are two doors to the soul, if you like. One that is affective and one that is more scientific. So you're able to really see the scene. You're seeing things over time as a progression, as an evolution. That's a great gift to the children.
Yes.
And this capacity for observation is honed in a way that evolves with the child. So in 5th grade, when they study botany, they observe the plants and draw the plants. And when they are then in the high school, they inspect them through the microscope. But they have had an experience all the way through school of a real relationship to what they're learning. I think nothing is taught that isn't really brought to the whole human being. That's at least the attempt. It's very hard to do it.
So it doesn't exist as an abstraction.
Eventually it can. Eventually it can be an abstraction. You can bring a law out of it, a theorem out of it, a concept
but
out of it.
It doesn't begin as an abstraction.
Does not, no. Even in the high school, when the experiments are done in a chemistry or physics class or biology class, there is a phenomenological approach. Let's find what's here. But it's not done without a goal in mind.
So that those things can resonate within the student.
Yes.
And not as ideas in their heads.
And it's very different when you go through a process, when you're teaching, say, physics in 6th or 7th grade, and rather than having a predetermined conclusion that you know is going to work, you have to really go through the process and really experiment and then see what actually happens. It's not a fait accompli before you begin. That would be boring. That would be silly. Why would we do that? But how can we see the nuances of what's there? So that's what we have to encourage the children to look for.
Yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy that turns out not to be contradictory. That on the one hand, we don't prescribe what the child experiences. On the other hand, it's not a free classroom. It's not an open classroom. It's a very carefully crafted sequence of lessons with a clear reason for doing that lesson at that time in that child's development. So the curriculum is really the heart and soul of what the child experiences. And although there is a lot of variation of how the teacher brings that curriculum, every teacher is autonomous in how he or she brings that curriculum. The subjects of the particular topics and when they are taught, that is the universal element. And that is true for every child in every Waldorf school all over the world. Of course, with geographic variations. So that's an awesome thing to think that we learn to farm in the 3rd grade. We learn about how wheat is grown, how the grains grow, and what they become, and how to make bread. And we do that in a Waldorf school in the 3rd grade anywhere, because at that age, the child really can gain so much from feeling connected to that practical activity, that real skill. So house building is part of the 3rd grade curriculum too.
Dorit, do you want to speak at all about the methodology of the Waldorf teacher training, how it goes about?
Well, sure. Our students come to us with a variety of backgrounds. We've had doctors and firemen and housewives and people who come out of the tech world and artists, every kind of background imaginable. And the age varies between 22 and 3 to 60 and over 60. And what people are coming to basically, coming for mainly is to find something of value in their lives. Some of them know they want to become teachers. Some of them don't anticipate that they will become teachers, although they do become teachers along the way because their self-confidence grows. Many people come to us after having reached a point in life that was really no way out feeling. And so when they're presented with this worldview that covers so much of the things we already know about but have no way of recognizing because they're not scientific in the way you mentioned earlier, such as a sense that it's important, the people you meet in your life. What is that sense? Where does that really fit into the scheme of things? I'm just using that as an example.
You see life as a great mystery again.
Yes, it's an old wisdom that Rudolf Steiner couched in a modern consciousness in a way that every human being
his unique contribution, wasn't it?
That's right. This is not there were 6,000 lectures he gave and some 25 books that he wrote. It's extraordinary. Nobody quite understands how he did all that. He was 63 when he died. And a lot of the work came out in the last 4 and 5 years of his life. But what his contribution was to make this an open secret. There is no secret. Anyone can do it. It's a path. It's a path of development, of self-development. I'm in charge of my own development, so we can only offer it to the students. And I'm very clear in my teaching that their inner life is the most sacrosanct thing that they have. I'm not going to mess with it. It's not my duty or obligation or responsibility, but to offer them the right thing at the right time, just as in the Waldorf School. So our first year is a kind of introductory year.
This is weekends.
We do weekends and then 4 weeks in the summer that
Yes.
are very intense and artistic mostly. And the second year is sort of becoming more intimately familiar with some of the core thoughts in this work of Steiner, which is referred to as anthroposophy or spiritual science. And then in the second year already a lot about the classroom, being in the classroom. And the third year focuses on the classroom skills, the classroom management, the curriculum, what underlies the curriculum. Why is it appropriate to teach, let's say, Roman history in the 6th grade? What is it about a 12-year-old that makes that appropriate? That's not a thing you can just talk about. It also has to be experienced over time as a reality. So I think there's an epistemological element to it, to begin to become conscious of your own thoughts. That's a big task. And I think the reason Steiner accomplished so much is that he didn't have stray thoughts.
You really have to meet that student in an authentic way. So if I was to see your son, I would really have to look at him, what
Yes.
Dora talked about, observing first without judgment.
Yes.
Who is this person? Before I put any concepts on him, I have to take him into my own imagination, my own thinking, and say, what can I do? What can I do to help? How
That's
can
right.
I meet you?
That's right.
And so there's no prescription. There's a lot of inspiration that comes if you do the work and if you're willing to make a relationship with that child. And I think that one of the greatest assets of Waldorf education, besides the clarity that it asks from our founder, Rudolf Steiner, is that you need to keep your heart open all the time to really embrace those students and ask, what can I do for you to see who you are? What can I do to help you along the way? And if you do that in a genuine, authentic way every day, it makes a difference over time because they begin to trust you and open up to themselves. If I don't transform myself, the student can't do it either.
Yes.
If I don't look at them wholeheartedly, then they know that I'm just putting an abstraction on them. But the difference is I recognize each student as a person completely.
Yes.
And that makes a huge difference over time.
Now
That's
you also
real love.
let them play. You let them work and then play.
Yes.
You talk about breathing in and breathing out.
Yes.
When you're working, you're sort of breathing in, but then when you're playing, then you get to breathe out, and that's the most natural thing in the world.
If you get children to move, they will naturally rebound into their intellect, into their feelings.
Yes.
But the more you smush them into something smaller, the more likely they're going to stay smushed.
That's right.
So.
Yeah. I wonder if I could try to articulate the smush.
Yes, please.
I think that that the breathing in and breathing out can happen within the actual lesson, so that the playtime is certainly a breathing out, but the wonderful thing about the experience of the lesson in the Waldorf classroom, of course, ideally, because it's hard to achieve it every time, is that the child really breathes in and breathes out through the material you are presenting. So that you tell a story, that's a kind of a breathing out for the child. But then you write something, that's kind of a breathing in for the child. So every lesson is composed. There is a rhythm in it. There's this wonderful rhythm, regenerative rhythm of breathing in and out. And I think that is one reason that I have been so often struck by the way the children love to come to school. I've taught a lot of 7th and 8th grades, particularly. Even still now, I teach those classes. And
it's a difficult age.
And they come to school talking about all the things kids talk about, all the things that you would expect them to talk about, what they did last night on Facebook and so forth. But they also are talking about their main lesson books and the projects they're working on and the experiments that they did and the writing that's due for today. And they're doing it with interest and enthusiasm. And I think part of that interest and enthusiasm is the fact that the curriculum meets them at the right time, the train and the track that you're talking about, but also that every lesson has this quality of engagement.
Yes.
Is an artistic event, regardless of whether or not we're teaching art. There's an artistic quality. There's also the quality of form and structure, which we could call a scientific element in every lesson. So I say to the teacher training students, you need to know at any moment when you're teaching, why you're teaching what you're teaching now. What is the next step? Where did you come from? Where are you going? In your lesson. It's a little bit like a musician. When you play a piece of music, you're carried. And yet you have to know where you are at every moment. So when we talk about artistic, we aren't talking about something that's amorphous and loose, but which really provides us with a modus operandi, a way of working with the child. And I think that what Jeff said there about looking at your son and seeing who he is, it requires a kind of self-development to be able to see who is there and not bring all your own sack of rocks, tinted glasses, biographical clutter into the picture.
It's a real art. And such a commitment to go all the way through 8 years. Jeff, you did 2 loops and then you took a sabbatical?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. That sounds about right. Well, our time has flown, as I was afraid it would. Well, Dorit Winter and Jeff Loubet, thank you so much for coming. I've enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you so much.